I'm sitting in a hostel in Bangkok, $42 left in my account. The flight home costs $1,847. I've been staring at this Expedia page for 3 hours. I'm 53 and I'm supposed to be retired. Instead, I'm calculating whether I can survive another week on instant noodles. 18 months ago, I stepped off that plane with $180,000 and a plan. The divorce was finalized in March 2022. 23 years of marriage, gone. Jennifer got the house. I got the 401k after lawyers took their cut. My tech company offered early retirement packages. Between severance and retirement funds, I walked away with $180,000. Enough to start over somewhere. Money actually mattered. Thailand kept coming up in every expat forum. Americans living like kings on Social Security. Beautiful women, cheap food, perfect weather. A decent condo cost $400 monthly. Street food cost $2. Even if I never worked again, $180,000 could last 15 years. The night before I left, I sat in my empty apartment with 2 suitcases. Everything else was sold. I felt lighter than I had in years. No mortgage, no expectations, just me and enough money to disappear. The flight was 14 hours of excitement. Looking out the window at Bangkok's sprawling lights, I thought this was it. Immigration was smooth. The taxi cost $12. When I told the driver I was staying, he smiled. Thailand very good for American people. The hotel was nothing fancy, but for $35 a night, I had air conditioning, Wi-Fi, and a view of the city. That first week, I did everything tourists do. Temples, markets, street food tours. But I was already thinking like a resident. Which neighborhoods were safe? Where did other foreigners live? How much would I actually need per month to live comfortably? I found an apartment in the second week. 1 bedroom, furnished, in a building full of other expats. Everyone had stories about how much better life was here. Dave from Phoenix had lived in Bangkok 8 years on Social Security. Best decision I ever made, he said over beers. The rent was $450 a month, utilities included. I paid 6 months up front because it felt good to have that stability. My first real expense in my new life, $2,700. I still had over $175,000 left. I was doing fine. Those first few months were exactly what I'd hoped for. I developed routines. Morning coffee at a cafe near my building where the owner remembered how I liked it. Afternoon walks through Lumpini Park. Evenings exploring different neighborhoods, trying restaurants I'd never heard of, talking to people whose lives seemed so much simpler than mine had ever been. I was spending about $1,500 a month, including rent. At that rate, my money would last more than 10 years without earning a penny of income. But paradise stops feeling special. The temples look the same. The conversations become repetitive complaints about politics. We were all running from something, and Thailand was just a nice place to hide. That's when I met Nim. I was having dinner alone at a restaurant in Thong Lo. Nim was at the next table with friends, dressed up like they were celebrating. When she got up to use the restroom, she stopped at my table. "You eat alone every night?" she asked. Her English was good, with just enough accent to be charming. "Not every night, just most nights." "That's sad," she said, smiling. "Thai people, we never eat alone. You want to join us? We're celebrating my friend's birthday." I should have said no. I should have finished my pad thai, paid my check, and walked back to my apartment. Instead, I said yes. Her name was Nimalaya, but everyone called her Nim. 28 years old, worked in marketing for a hotel chain. Born in Udon Thani, but had been living in Bangkok for 6 years. She spoke 3 languages, had traveled to Singapore and Hong Kong, dreamed of visiting America someday. We talked until the restaurant closed. Her friends left around midnight, but she stayed. We walked through the empty streets of Bangkok, past vendor carts shutting down, and late-night bars still glowing with neon signs. "You're different from other Farang men I meet," she told me as we waited for her taxi. "Most of them, they think Thailand is like a movie. They want everything to be exotic and simple. You seem like you actually want to understand." I gave her my number. She texted me the next morning. For the next month, we saw each other constantly. She showed me parts of Bangkok I never would have found. Night markets, temple festivals, her favorite somtam vendor who made papaya salad so spicy it made my eyes water. She never asked for money, never hinted about expensive things. When I offered to pay for dinners, she insisted we split the check. She had her own career, her own dreams that didn't involve depending on anyone else. I was falling in love. Maybe I was just lonely. Maybe I was grateful to feel needed again, but it felt real. More real than anything had felt since Jennifer and I stopped talking to each other like human beings sometime around our 15th wedding anniversary. 3 months after we met, Nim's work visa situation changed. Her hotel chain was restructuring. She had 60 days to find a new job that would sponsor her visa, or she'd have to move back to Udon Thani. "I don't want to leave Bangkok," she told me. "Everything I built here, my friends, my life, if I go back home, I start over with nothing. What if you didn't have to find a job? What if we got married?" The words were out of my mouth before I'd really thought them through, but as soon as I said them, they felt right. We spent every day together anyway. She made me laugh in ways I'd forgotten were possible. I'd been married before, but this felt different. Lighter, more honest. "You want to marry me?" she asked, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely surprised. "I want to try building something with you," I said. "Here, in Thailand. A life that actually makes sense." She didn't say yes that night, but she didn't say no either. We talked about it for weeks, what it would mean, how it would work, what kind of future we could build together. She was practical about it in ways that made me trust her more. This wasn't desperation or romance. This was two people choosing to solve problems together. The wedding was small, just us, two witnesses from my building, and a photographer Nim found online. We did it at the district office in Wat Thana. No ceremony, no party, just paperwork and pictures. It cost 500 baht, plus tips for the translator, less than $20 to become legally married in Thailand. But then the real expenses started. Getting my marriage visa required documentation I hadn't expected, certified copies of my divorce decree, apostilled and translated, medical examinations, police background checks, lawyer fees. By the time I had legal permission to stay in Thailand as Nim's husband, I'd spent $4,800 on paperwork and bureaucracy. We moved into a bigger apartment, 2 bedrooms, better location, closer to the BTS station for Nim's job search. Rent was $800 a month, double what I'd been paying, but it felt worth it. This was our home now, not just my hiding place. Nim found work with a smaller hotel group, but the salary was 30% less than her previous job. She was stressed about money constantly, working late, taking on freelance projects to make up the difference. I started covering more of our shared expenses, groceries, utilities, her phone bill. It felt natural. I had savings, she had income, we were a team. But then her father got sick. It started with chest pains in November. The local hospital sent him home with medication, but the pains got worse. Nim brought him to Bangkok for better medical attention. The cardiac specialist was thorough. The diagnosis was coronary artery disease. He needed surgery. A triple bypass would cost 850,000 baht, about $24,000. "We can't afford this," Nim told me that night, crying in our kitchen. "My family doesn't have health insurance. My mother stopped working years ago to take care of the farm. We have maybe 50,000 baht in savings. I'd been married to her for 6 months. This was her father. He was lying in a hospital bed while we debated whether we could afford to save his life. "How much of the 850,000 do you need?" I asked. She looked at me like I'd offered to solve world hunger. "You would do that? For my father? For our family?" I said. I transferred $20,000 from my US account to cover the surgery and recovery. It was the largest single expense I'd made since moving to Thailand, but watching Nim hug me in that hospital waiting room, watching her father survive an operation that might not have happened without my help, it felt like the right decision. This was what marriage meant. Taking care of each other's people, sharing the burdens that were too heavy to carry alone. The surgery was successful. Nim's father stayed in Bangkok for 2 weeks of recovery, then went back to Udon Thani with instructions for follow-up care and a bag full of medications. I felt good about what we'd accomplished together. I'd helped save someone's life. That had to count for something. But it also meant my savings had dropped from $175,000 to $155,000. Still plenty to live on, but the number in my account was moving in the wrong direction for the first time since I'd arrived in Thailand. 3 months later, Nim's mother fell and broke her hip. The injury was serious enough that she couldn't work the farm alone while her husband continued recovering from heart surgery. Nim flew back to Udon Thani every weekend to help with chores and coordinate medical care. The flights were eating up her entire paycheck. She was exhausted, stressed, losing weight. "Maybe I should quit my job and move back home for a while," she said one Sunday night after returning from another emergency trip. "Just until my parents are stable." I couldn't imagine Bangkok without her. More than that, I couldn't imagine my life in Thailand without her. She was the reason I'd started to feel like I belonged here, instead of just hiding here. "What if I gave you money for a full-time caregiver for your mother?" I asked. "Someone local who could handle the day-to-day care so you don't have to choose between your job and your family." The caregiver costs 15,000 baht per month, about $420. Not a huge amount by itself, but it was money going out every month, without any clear end date. Combined with the medical bills, the flights back and forth, and the general increase in our cost of living since getting married, I was spending closer to $3,000 a month instead of the $1 I'd budgeted. At that rate, my money would last about 4 years instead of 10. But I told myself it was temporary. Nim's parents would recover. Her work situation would stabilize. We'd figure out a more sustainable approach once the crisis passed. The crisis never passed. It just changed shape. In July, 8 months after her father's surgery, Nim came home from work with news. Her hotel group was downsizing again. Her position was being eliminated, effective immediately. They offered her a severance package worth 2 months' salary and a letter of recommendation. She'd be unemployed by the end of the week. "I can find another job," she said, but her voice didn't sound confident. "Maybe not in hotels, but there are other opportunities." For 3 months, she applied for everything: marketing positions, administrative jobs, English tutoring, customer service roles with international companies. She had interviews, made it to second rounds, got positive feedback, but nothing turned into an offer. The market was competitive, and companies preferred candidates who didn't require visa sponsorship. I was covering all our living expenses during her job search: rent, food, transportation, plus the ongoing costs for her parents' care. My monthly burn rate had increased to nearly $4,000. My account balance dropped below $100,000 for the first time since arriving in Thailand. In October, Nim found work with a small export company. The salary was half what she'd been making in hotels, but it came with visa sponsorship and health insurance. We celebrated at our favorite restaurant, relieved that she was employed again and that my visa status was secure as long as we stayed married. But the reduced income meant I was still covering most of our expenses. Even with her new job, We were spending $3,500 a month as a couple. My savings continued shrinking by about $2,000 every 30 days. That's when Nim suggested we invest in property. Rent is throwing money away, she explained, showing me listings. If we buy a condo, we build equity. Property values in Bangkok always go up. She'd found a development in Rama 9. Units started at 4.5 million baht, about $130,000. As Nim's husband, I was legally allowed to own property in Thailand under certain conditions. We put down 20%, about $26,000, and financed the rest. The mortgage payments were 18,000 baht per month, roughly $500. Our housing costs actually decreased slightly. Moving into our own place felt like a fresh start. 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city that made me remember why I'd fallen in love with Bangkok in the first place. Nim decorated with furniture we picked out together, photos from our trips around Thailand, art from local markets. It felt like home in a way my previous apartment never had. But owning property came with unexpected costs. The air conditioning units needed service. The building's management company imposed a special assessment for elevator repairs. The bathroom faucets leaked, requiring a plumber who spoke no English and charged premium rates for foreign customers. Every month brought some new expense that hadn't been in our budget. More concerning was Nim's increasing anxiety about her job. The export company was struggling with supply chain disruptions and currency fluctuations. Employees were being laid off regularly. She started working overtime without extra pay, afraid that showing any sign of dissatisfaction might make her a target for the next round of cuts. The stress was affecting her health. She had trouble sleeping, complained of headaches, started having panic attacks on Sunday nights before the work week began. I suggested she quit and take time to find something better, but she was terrified of losing her work visa and jeopardizing my ability to stay in Thailand legally. That's when she proposed the business idea. "I've been thinking about this for months," she told me one Saturday morning. "What if we started our own company? Import-export, focused on organic products, health foods, natural cosmetics, things American consumers want from Thailand." She'd done research, identified suppliers, created spreadsheets showing profit margins, calculated startup costs. It was more thorough than any business plan I'd seen. The initial investment would be about 1.2 million baht, she explained. $35,000 to set up the company, establish supplier relationships, and handle the first year of inventory. But if we capture even 2% of the organic product market in California, we'd be profitable within 18 months. I wanted to believe it was possible, not just because the numbers looked promising, but because I could see how excited Nim got when she talked about building something of her own. She'd been working for other people's companies her entire career, making them successful while struggling to secure her own future. This would be different. This would be ours. I transferred $35,000 to establish Sunshine Imports Company Limited. We registered the company, rented a small warehouse space, hired an accountant to handle the legal requirements. Nim quit her job with the export company and threw herself into building our business full-time. For 6 months it felt like we were onto something. We established relationships with suppliers in Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai, developed relationships with organic food stores and wellness centers in Los Angeles and San Francisco, shipped our first containers of products and received positive feedback from customers. Nim was happier than I'd seen her since we met. She was building something that mattered to her, using skills and connections I never could have developed on my own. But international trade turned out to be more complicated than our business plan had anticipated. Customs delays cost us thousands in storage fees. Product quality varied more than expected, leading to returns and customer complaints. Currency fluctuations ate into our already thin profit margins. Competing with established importers required marketing expenses we hadn't budgeted for. After a year in business, Sunshine Imports generated $48,000 revenue. Our expenses were $52,000. We'd lost $4,000 plus my original $35,000 investment. The company required constant cash flow for inventory and operating costs. Every month brought new demands for money I didn't have. I was down to $43,000 in savings. 18 months earlier, I'd had 4 times that amount. The final crisis came in March 2024. Nim's mother, who had been managing her recovery from the broken hip with the caregiver I'd hired, suffered a stroke. The local hospital in Udon Thani wasn't equipped for the specialized care she needed. Nim wanted to bring her to Bangkok immediately. The neurologist says, if we wait even a few days, she might not recover, Nim explained through tears. But the ambulance transport costs 80,000 baht, and that's before any treatment. I looked at my bank balance. $43,000 was what I had left in the world. $43,000 between me and being completely broke in a foreign country. I'd already spent more than $130,000 on medical care, business investments, and family emergencies over the past year and a half. I can't, I told her. I'm sorry, but I just can't afford it anymore. The expression on her face was something I'll never forget. Not anger, not disappointment. Confusion, like she was trying to understand how the person who'd married her and promised to build a life together could suddenly become someone who wouldn't help save her mother. But she's my mother, Nim said quietly. And this is all the money I have left, I replied. She found the money somewhere else. A loan from family members, help from friends, a crowdfunding campaign through her social media networks. Her mother survived the stroke with minimal permanent damage, but something between us died during those conversations about what we could and couldn't afford. Nim stopped talking to me about business plans, stopped sharing details about her family's medical situations, stopped asking for my opinion about decisions that affected both our lives. We lived in the same condo, slept in the same bed, ate meals together, but we'd become strangers managing separate crises in the same space. In June, she told me she was closing Sunshine Imports. It's not working, she said simply. We're losing money every month, and I can't keep asking you to fund something that isn't profitable. The closure meant liquidating our remaining inventory at a loss, paying penalties to break supplier contracts, and covering final expenses for the accountant and warehouse rental. When everything was settled, I'd lost the entire $35,000 investment, plus an additional $8,000 in shutdown costs. My total savings, $28,000. 2 weeks later, Nim announced she'd accepted a job offer in Singapore. Better salary, career advancement opportunities, a chance to start fresh somewhere that didn't require depending on anyone else for financial support. What about us? I asked. What about our marriage? What marriage? She replied. You live here, I live here, but we're not building anything together anymore. We're just 2 people splitting expenses until your money runs out. She wasn't wrong. We hadn't been intimate in months, barely had conversations that weren't about logistics or money. I'd come to Thailand looking for freedom and found myself trapped in another relationship that was slowly dying under the weight of financial stress and unmet expectations. Nim left for Singapore in July. She took her clothes, her laptop, and the few pieces of furniture we'd bought together that had sentimental value. Everything else stayed in the condo, including the mortgage payments that were now entirely my responsibility. I was 53 years old, living alone in a country where I didn't speak the language, with $28,000 to my name and monthly expenses of at least $1,800. Simple math told me I had about 15 months before I'd be completely broke. The condo was in both our names, but with Nim in Singapore and our marriage effectively over. Selling it would require her cooperation and legal proceedings that would cost more than I could afford. I was stuck with a mortgage I couldn't pay and an asset I couldn't liquidate. By September, I'd missed 2 mortgage payments. The bank sent urgent letters in Thai that I paid to have translated. I was behind on everything and sinking deeper every month. I tried to find work, English tutoring, freelance writing, consulting, but I was competing with younger, qualified foreigners who had proper work visas. Most jobs barely covered rent. I started selling everything: my laptop, camera equipment, clothes, anything worth a few $100. I moved into progressively cheaper accommodations: a studio for $400, then a guest house room for $200. Finally, a hostel bed for $12 a night. By December, I was down to my last $400. I hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. The hostel manager said I had to check out unless I could pay for another night. I called my ex-wife first. "I'm sorry this happened, but I can't help. I'm barely managing my own expenses." My brother said the same. Former co-workers didn't answer. Finally, I called my cousin Lisa. "Oh, Western Union you $500, she said. "That's all I can do. I'm sitting in this hostel, day 18 of paying $12 per night. I've applied for emergency assistance at the US Embassy, but being broke in Thailand doesn't qualify unless I'm also injured or imprisoned." Yesterday, I started a GoFundMe campaign. So far, 3 people have donated $87. I'm not compelling enough to go viral. I'm just a middle-aged man who made bad financial decisions and ran out of money. Tomorrow, I'll call Lisa again. I'll check humanitarian organizations. I'll refresh that Expedia page and hope for miracles. But tonight, I'll lie in this bunk bed listening to a 22-year-old Australian tell temple stories and try to remember what it felt like believing paradise was affordable forever.